There is only one United States Navy warship still held hostage by an enemy nation. It's not some forgotten relic from the Revolutionary War. It's not a wreck sitting at the bottom of the ocean. It's a fully intact vessel, sitting in North Korea right now. How did an American warship fall into enemy hands without a single shot fired in its defense? Why is it still there, rusting away in Pyongyang, paraded as a trophy of North Korea's victory over the United States? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why haven't we taken it back? This is the story of the USS Pueblo, a top-secret spy mission, a ruthless dictator, and a humiliating chapter in United States military history that the government would rather you forget. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to 1968, to a mission that should have never been approved. By 1968, the Cold War was at its peak. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a global chess match, and the Korean Peninsula was a critical flashpoint. North Korea, backed by the USSR and China, was growing increasingly hostile, launching border attacks and even attempting to assassinate the South Korean president. Amid this rising tension, the United States hatched a plan, a top-secret naval mission to spy on North Korea from international waters. Enter the USS Pueblo, a small, unarmed intelligence-gathering vessel. Its job was to sail dangerously close to the North Korean coast, eavesdrop on military communications and intercept coded messages. A high-stakes mission, on a ship barely equipped for combat. And that wasn't even the worst part. The Pueblo was woefully unprepared for what lay ahead. The ship's crew had almost no combat training, and only a handful of outdated machine guns mounted to the deck, nowhere near enough firepower to stand up to the North Korean Navy. Even worse, the ship carried top-secret encryption devices and classified intelligence documents, meaning that if captured, the United States risked handing critical military secrets straight to the enemy. And yet, despite these risks, the Pueblo was ordered to proceed, alone, with no escort, into hostile waters. It was a mission built on overconfidence and miscalculation. United States officials assumed North Korea wouldn't dare attack an American warship. They believed that as long as the Pueblo stayed in international waters, it would be untouchable. They were dead wrong. Because on January 23, 1968, just weeks into the mission, North Korea made its move. The USS Pueblo was drifting in the frigid waters off the coast of North Korea, antennas raised, silently intercepting enemy communications. To the crew, it was just another day of intelligence gathering. Then, a shadow appeared on the horizon. A North Korean SO-1 class submarine chaser was approaching fast. The ship's crew assumed they'd be shadowed, maybe even harassed, but no one expected a confrontation. After all, the Pueblo was in international waters, far outside North Korea's claimed territorial boundary. Then came another vessel, and another. Within minutes, 4 torpedo boats and 2 MiG-21 fighter jets were closing in, surrounding the Pueblo on all sides. The radio crackled to life. A North Korean officer issued a chilling order, "Heave to, or I will fire." Commander Lloyd Booker, the Pueblo's captain, knew they were in serious trouble. His ship was outgunned, outnumbered, and outmaneuvered. He attempted to stall, ordering evasive maneuvers while his crew scrambled to destroy classified documents. If they were boarded, those secrets could not fall into enemy hands. But the Pueblo wasn't built for speed. It maxed out at 13 knots, barely enough to outrun a fishing boat. Within moments, North Korean vessels opened fire. Cannon shells ripped through the ship's hull, shattering windows and filling compartments with smoke. Machine gun fire sprayed across the deck, hitting crew members. One sailor, Dwayne Hodges, was struck by shrapnel. He bled out in minutes, becoming the first and only casualty of the attack. Booker had a decision to make: fight, flee, or surrender. Fighting was unwise. The Pueblo's outdated machine guns were no match for North Korean torpedoes and aircraft. Fleeing was impossible. The Pueblo was too slow and the enemy was too close. That left one option. Reluctantly, Commander Booker ordered his crew to stand down. The American flag was lowered. The white flag of surrender was raised. And just like that, a United States Navy warship had been captured by the enemy. But for the men aboard the Pueblo, the nightmare was just beginning. The moment the USS Pueblo's crew surrendered, they were no longer sailors. They were prisoners of war. Dragged from their ship, 82 American servicemen were blindfolded, beaten, and marched at gunpoint onto North Korean soil. Commander Booker was separated from his men and hauled off for interrogation. His captors had one goal: to break him. North Korea wanted a confession. They wanted Bucher to admit that the Pueblo had illegally entered their waters and was spying on the North Korean government. They wanted proof that the United States had provoked the attack, and they were willing to use any means necessary to get it. For hours they tortured him, beatings, starvation, mock executions. At one point they held a gun to his head, threatening to execute his men one by one unless he signed a confession. Bucher refused, so they brought in his crew and forced him to watch as they were beaten senseless. With no other option, he signed the confession, writing it in such deliberately broken English that it was clear he had been coerced. But even then, the abuse didn't stop. The prisoners endured daily beatings, forced labor and interrogations. They were given rotting food and suffered from malnutrition. And yet, even in captivity, the men of the Pueblo found ways to fight back. Whenever they were forced to pose for propaganda photos, they secretly flipped off the camera, telling the world exactly what they thought of their captors. The North Koreans didn't realize the gesture's meaning until the photos were published in American newspapers. Furious, the guards beat them relentlessly for a full week. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and still there was no sign of rescue. The United States government was caught in an impossible situation. Launching a military operation to recover the prisoners could spark all-out war with North Korea. But doing nothing meant leaving American servicemen to rot in captivity. So Washington did the unthinkable. After 11 months of failed negotiations, the United States apologized, admitting in a formal statement that the Pueblo had violated North Korean waters. It was a lie, but it was the only way to bring the crew home. On December 23, 1968, exactly 11 months after their capture, the Pueblo's crew was marched to the demilitarized zone and allowed to cross into South Korea. They were finally free. But while the men came home, the Pueblo never did. Because to this day, North Korea still holds the USS Pueblo as a war trophy, and the United States has never taken it back. The ship sits docked on the Taedong River in Pyongyang, transformed into a floating anti-American propaganda exhibit. North Korean tour guides proudly tell visitors how their country defeated the mighty United States Navy, and inside, bullet holes from the attack are still visible. So why hasn't the United States taken it back? There are a few reasons, none of them good. First, there's diplomacy. The United States and North Korea have never officially ended the Korean War. Any attempt to retrieve the Pueblo, by force or diplomacy, would risk escalating tensions between the two countries. Over the decades, multiple administrations have tried to negotiate its return. All have failed. Second, there's public awareness, or lack thereof. The Pueblo incident was a national humiliation, overshadowed at the time by the Vietnam War. The government wanted people to forget about it, and for the most part, they did. Few Americans today even know that a United States Navy ship is still held hostage. And finally, there's pride. Recovering the Pueblo would mean admitting that it was ever lost in the first place. For North Korea, the ship is a powerful propaganda tool. For the United States, it's a lingering embarrassment. But here's the most unsettling part. The USS Pueblo is still an active United States Navy vessel. Despite being in enemy hands for over 50 years, it has never been decommissioned. That means, on paper, the United States Navy still has a warship sitting in North Korea, captured without a single shot fired in its defense. The United States, the most powerful military force in the world, allowed a tiny, impoverished dictatorship to seize one of its Navy ships without a single shot fired in its defense. And even worse, we let them keep it. Think about that for a second. This wasn't some rogue terrorist group or a heavily armed superpower. This was North Korea, a country that, at the time, had a barely functional navy and an economy on the verge of collapse. And yet, when they took an American warship hostage, the United States did nothing. Instead of standing firm, our government caved to their demands. Instead of retaliating, we let the sailors endure 11 months of brutal captivity before signing a humiliating apology letter. North Korea had outplayed us. They took an American ship, paraded it as a victory, and got away with it. And what did we do? We moved on? We acted like it never happened? We let it become an embarrassing footnote in history? The United States has fought wars over less, but for some reason, when North Korea took one of our own, we let it slide. This wasn't just a failure of military leadership, it was a failure of national pride. A message was sent that day, loud and clear. The United States would rather take the hit than escalate a fight. And North Korea learned that lesson well. Because even today they still use the Pueblo as proof that they defeated America. That ship, an active United States Navy warship, is still sitting in Pyongyang, still held hostage, still an open wound on our military's reputation. Tour guides proudly claim that the mighty United States Navy was powerless to stop them. And the truth? They're not wrong. And the worst part? We've done nothing to take it back. There have been calls to retrieve the Pueblo. Some suggest diplomatic pressure, others have called for military action. After all, no other nation on Earth has a commissioned United States Navy warship sitting in their capital. But so far, nothing. North Korea holds on to it because they can. They know we won't start a war over it. They know we'd rather ignore the embarrassment than take a stand. And as long as that ship remains in enemy hands, it's a symbol of a moment when America backed down. So what do you think? Should the United States finally act to reclaim the Pueblo? Or has this been buried too deep in history to ever be made right? Either way, the fact remains, North Korea is still holding a United States warship hostage. And for now, we're still letting them get away with it. The Pueblo is still out there rusting in a North Korean harbor, and until the day it comes home, it will remain a symbol of a humiliating chapter in American history that we've never corrected. If you think it's time to set the record straight, enlist in this channel by subscribing. We cover the stories that history books skim over, the victories, the failures, and the lessons we still haven't learned. Don't let this story be forgotten. Share it with a friend.